Why do we feel more inspired to write poetry when we're in love, paint when we're joyful, and play music when we're grieving? I'm Tom, and we're going to dive into the fascinating relationship between our emotions and creativity. Today, we'll be looking at a study that uses jazz musicians to explore this link, and the results might just change the way you think about art and the artists. Creativity is one of the most universal human experiences. Whether it's through music, visual art, or storytelling, we have all been touched by it. And yet, creativity is almost always, if not always, influenced by emotions. Van Gogh once said, "I put my heart and my soul into my work, and I have lost my mind in the process." He was expressing how deeply intertwined his emotional life was with his creativity. But how exactly does this relationship plays out in the brain? In this study, 12 professional jazz musicians were asked to improvise music while looking at photos that represented different emotional states shown here: happy, sad, or ambiguous. The musicians created pieces based on what they felt when they saw these images, all while their brain activity was measured using fMRI. The results? Art washes away from the soul the dust of everyday life. Much like Picasso's view of art, the brain is washed with emotions when it creates. The emotional intent behind the musician's improvisations dramatically alter the brain activity. Here's where things get interesting. Depending on what emotions inspires you, your brain reacts in a completely different way. When the musicians play pieces inspired by positive emotions, when we create something joyful or upbeat, areas of the brain linked to pleasure and flow, like amygdala, became highly active. The brain essentially enters in a state of immersion or flow, if we want to use a trending word. But things looked a lot different when the musicians improvised based on negative emotions. Here, areas associated with emotional awareness, such as the insula and hippocampus, became more involved. The writer Ernest Hemingway captured this link between emotions and creativity perfectly when he said, "There is nothing to writing. All you do is sit down at a typewriter and bleed." Hemingway wasn't just being poetic, he was tapping into the way our brain works. Negative emotions don't allow us to enter in the same flow state as positive ones. Instead, they make us more aware of the emotional weight of what we're creating. Back to the flow state. When we're in it, we lose ourselves in the process. It's like time disappears, and the work feels effortless. The studies showed that during happy improvisation, the brain prefrontal cortex deactivates, a state known as hyperfrontality. This quieting of the critical part of our brain lets us be more open and spontaneous. Miles Davis used to say something like, "I'll play it first and tell you what it is later." He was describing the essence of creative flow, being so in tune with your art that you don't need to think about it. You just create. But with negative emotion, the study found out that the flow state was less accessible. Instead of letting go, the musicians' brains were more engaged in emotional awareness, almost like they were processing the emotion as they played. Here comes the data. Let's break down how the music itself changed based on emotional cue. When improvising happy music, musicians used higher note densities, more notes played per second. This created faster, more upbeat tempo, reflecting the positive emotions. On the other hand, when it came to the sadder tunes, the musicians slowed things down. Fewer notes, more space, almost as if they were feeling the weight of each key, which are also much less often in major in comparison to the ambiguous or the happy improvisations. So what does this study tell us? 1. Emotions guide creativity. Whether you're playing music, drawing, dancing, or creating any other form of art, your emotional state shapes and guides your creative process. 2. Flow states depend on emotions. Positive emotions allow the brain to relax and enter flow state, while negative emotions makes us more introspective. 3. Creativity is a complex, dynamic process. Creativity isn't straightforward. It's a bit of a mess in the brain, with different parts lighting up all at once depending on what we're feeling. Creativity and emotions have always seemed intertwined, but this study gives us a glimpse into just how powerful that connection is at a neural level. Whether you're creating art, music, or writing, your emotional state is playing a bigger role than you might just realize. To close, I'll leave you with a quote from Bob Dylan, who once said, "I consider myself a poet first and a musician second. I live like a poet and I will die like a poet." Being a poet seems to capture this ability to feel, surf on those emotions and bring something to one's ears, eyes and imagination. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the neuroscience of creativity. Until next time, make sure that your brain is braining.